Thank you, everybody, to be here, and most importantly, the Saudi FDA to allow Mikomed to join this event as well. My topic here today is industry perspective on market controls, post-market controls, kind of follow on from Petra of once a device is out there in the field, what really happens. A brief highlight of what I want to speak about is that once a device is actually approved, post-market controls actually ensure that the device is continually safe and efficacious in its performance. These are critical processes both for manufacturer and the regulatory agencies to protect the well-being of public. And what I aim to provide is a high-level overview and key basis of why and how it can be successful. So why do we have post-market controls? Essentially, it's all about patient safety. That's what it's there for, whether you call about pre-market controls or post-market controls. Patient safety is the key fundamental driver of regulations or even industry activities around it. You've seen this life cycle model presented in several presentations today, so I also like to follow the same lead. It very well depicts what and various stages of medical device development, release to market is. I highlight very much on the two parts, pre-market approval and post-market approval, and highlight on the attitude that the regulators have is basically to protect public health. And the biggest fear that in creating is that one event is probably waiting for a serious public threat. And that's why these controls are very important. But I would also like to take a moment and pause here a little bit because we focus a lot about the seriousness and the threat and risks and things like that. But the medical devices, when they are out in the field, they really help people improve lives. And that's one of the best things I feel working in this industry helps me contribute towards humanity. So it's a great opportunity as well. There are several regulations around the world. All of them have an element of this part as part and parcel of their. No regulations is complete without the post-market controls. They always have that element to it. And it's therefore recognized that yes, we have pre-market, we can only protect so much before it's launched, but it's after it's there, that's where the real buck hits the road. In general, when we talk about post-market controls or surveillance, it's a very broad term, and it actually covers all aspects of monitoring activities of a marketing device. If we actually try to dissect what post-market control comprises, it comprises of two very distinct and interrelated activities. One is vigilance system. This is where we are actually talking about when some failure happens in the field, when there's an adverse event, when there is a corrections, recalls, and things like that. The other is post-market surveillance systems. This is kind of a systemic review of how the device is performing. And it is very important to understand the approach or the distinctions between these two systems within the whole post-market control gambit. So if we talk about post-market surveillance, it is actually a proactive system. It's driven by the manufacturer's experience of what he's undergoing, whether it's his analysis of device design, device performance, manufacturing process performance. If you look at the regulatory side of things, then US FDA requires post-market surveillance, and its outcome is to be shared only on very special case-by-case basis. It's not always mandatory, it is recommended, but there is a way for it. Post-market surveillance plans, when companies have, they help prevent incidents. They help companies to become more proactive, become more intuitive of how the landscape of the device is performing. When we talk about vigilance system, that is very much a reactive mode. It's driven by end user experience. When the device fails, somebody gets hurt. It's normally based on a single event. that one event happened and then we have to report. And that particular aspect is a mandatory requirement of the regulations, that every incident, every event that has led to harm or could possibly cause harm has to be reported and advised. So if I try to bring the two systems together, that basically becomes the whole post-market surveillance and vigilance part. Then what you see on to the right-hand side is post-market surveillance, where a lot of data input is given to the manufacturers, whether it's the customer feedback, customer complaints, internal analysis of data, competitor actions, research, new technologies, new regulations coming into play. All of this, basically the post-market surveillance is what's happening. When you talk about vigilance, reporting, and corrections, it's all about what happened actually in the field on an individual device, individual user basis. As a consequence, manufacturer reacts. As a consequence, he reports to regulators. As a consequence, he does something in the field. But coming back to this, how does this system actually work? The system actually works because of three entities involved, three stakeholders: the manufacturers, regulators, and the end users, whether it's patients, doctors, or hospitals. When we talk about this particular market, this particular region, distributors, importers become a key component of how and why this system is successful. Not all of our manufacturers are represented here as the importing entity. They are usually represented by distributors. They are our business partners, and they are also independent companies. We talked about PIP recall just recently, and that was a clear case of fraud. There are other also similar issues, but not all of them are cases or bases of fraud. Some of them are real device design failures. One such case is metal-on-metal hip implants, where eventually the device started failing and created a lot of issues. As a consequence of all of this, the natural reflex of regulatory bodies is who is to blame, and as a consequence, you have more and more stricter regulations. When these events and issues happen in the field, the trust and transparency is really impacted. If I go back, this relationship of stakeholder management that is there, it is very much dependent on trust and transparency. Manufacturers trust that the end users, hospitals, will tell them when something wrong goes happen and that they can do some necessary corrections. Regulators do trust the manufacturers that you will be open and honest about sharing the information about how your tests have done and provided the right data. So in all, trust and transparency are the key events that actually support post-market controls. If you look at what's going on today in terms of post-market controls practices, we have reporting requirements in US FDA, MDRs, EU MDVs. I broadly classify these two ones because most of our devices are approved in one of those two areas or both. Local authority reporting that is there, whether it is to Japan, state in China, Canada, Australia, and even in Saudi, when there is a setup of inter-authority network to share recalls and field actions. We quite often see authorities share information that some recall is happening in some place, and we get questions asked in some other countries. We also see an independent organization like ECRI alerting hospitals that a company has issued a recall if you have that instrument or device in your market. There was also an initiative in EU where they were gathering incident reports in a particular format to actually see what product trends and performance trends are, again, to be more proactive. These are some of the things that is going on in the landscape today that are all diverted towards the post-market controls. The challenges that we face as industry are one with respect to market access. that the availability of device or a version of device is suddenly available in a market, and I'm particularly talking about parallel imports. Yeah, we talk about control or release of product to the market is one thing, and there are several versions of a device. You can talk about what is the difference. Largely the differences happens on localization, translations, labeling, sometimes voltage differences, and we see these devices going cross-border. Where and how does this impact? If our recall efforts are focused on the area where we know the device has been sold, not necessarily the other areas. So market access is very important challenge for us as well. Traceability. When we sell a device, it's with the hospital, it's with the clinic, it's with the end user. Where and how this hospital manages, locates the devices within their premises is also a challenge. Device misuse, alteration of device design by the end user is also some of the challenges that we face. And these are some of the things that are not always within the control of the industry, because once the device is sold to the end user or to the distributor, then the control becomes a bit less. It's a challenge that we face. Future state, we talk about a lot of harmonized systems and regulations and registrations. Probably a harmonized systems on recall and adverse event management is also something that could be done, so that we are reporting once and not repeating the same event again and again in different formats or to different authorities. Possible visibility to product performance and trends. Of course, there is an element of confidentiality of what can be shared, what cannot be shared, but it would be nice to know in general how a particular type of device is performing, so that the company that is developing is kind of mindful of the issues that are facing it. Complete awareness of stakeholders. This probably is the most key thing that is needed. All the three stakeholders share responsibilities in order for the safe and efficacious performance of device. They all have a role to play. If they play it well, we will have improved device design every time. Is it a wishful thinking? I don't think so, but probably it is, because as earlier we were discussing about harmonized medical device pre-market approvals, this probably is also a wishful thinking. Could there be a post-market harmonization as well? But if we do achieve it, will be fantastic. I again come back to the conclusion that if I look at the post-market controls, the systems, the processes are there, but it all boils down to the three pillars, the three people, three entities that are actually interacting very closely in this process: the manufacturers, the regulators, and the end users, patients, hospitals. They talk to each other, they work with each other, sharing the information, sharing their experience. And it is very much based on trust and transparency. The moment that trust and transparency is removed, either one of the elements, we basically have a nightmare waiting to happen. I hope I didn't just rush through the question session too fast, but thank you very much once again for inviting me. And if there are questions, I'm sure we open the floor to that.